Next, if the economy's doing so well, why are there so many foreclosures in Delaware? And important information if you own a dog. This is the Delaware Way. Welcome to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. A continuing effort to get all the people in Delaware who want to work employed, including those with disabilities. To talk about that, Secretary of Labor Patrice Gilliam-Johnson returns. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
But before we get into the efforts to make certain that people with disabilities have an entry into the workforce, I do want to talk about the unemployment numbers, which have stayed pretty steady in the low 4s, 4.3%. And yet we had someone on the show that was the real estate commissioner. When I asked why does Delaware rank #1 or the bottom when it comes to foreclosures, she said it's because of unemployment in the state. It's because we lost jobs with DuPont, and some big companies and some pharmaceutical companies have gone. How come that shows up in foreclosures and not in the unemployment rate?
I'm not quite sure why, except I think there might be there's a period of time where things have to adjust.
Okay.
I will say to you that the unemployment rate has in fact been 4.3 for quite some time. And we actually are doing pretty well nationally with regard to those numbers. We have in fact seen the closing of DuPont and AstraZeneca, and so I would imagine that perhaps we're seeing some reflection of that in housing. The only thing I can say to you is that we're working really hard and diligently at Department of Labor to ensure that as many people as we can work with in those companies to make sure that there continues to be some employment, or at least that we're working with them so that they can become re-employed. So I can just only say that at this particular point in time, we might see some reflection in the unemployment rate over a period of time. I hope not. Not significantly anyway, but that we are continuing to work with people in DuPont and AstraZeneca to get them employed. As
the Secretary of Labor, and I'll stay on this for just one more second, do you look at other factors to tell you that the unemployment rate might be going up? I mean, obviously you look at the closures, but do you look at things like foreclosures? Do you look at things like wages and say, uh-oh, we might have a problem? We definitely look at wages. And as a result of the wage data, there's some indication that we might see some slight fluctuation. I'm hesitant to talk about what that would look like, only because the data hasn't gotten in yet. Foreclosures, I'm not sure that we actually look at that. Now let's move on to the topic, which is why you came in the first place, to talk about people with disabilities in Delaware. It is difficult for anybody to find a job sometimes in the economy. Even though it's coming back, it's difficult. But for someone with disabilities, I would imagine it's much more difficult. First, talk about the challenges and then what the state is doing. What have you seen as the challenges? Well, one of the things is that, what we're beginning to recognize is that disability, we oftentimes think about the disabled population as those individuals where we visually can see that they are disabled. There's a lot of people with disabilities where it's not necessarily visible. So we have physical disabilities, we have emotional disabilities, and we have cognitive disabilities. So in some respects, oftentimes we are working with populations that on the surface don't necessarily look to be quote unquote disabled, but they still are disabled nonetheless. The biggest challenge that we have is working with employers to help employers understand that this is really an untapped resource, and that rather than looking at them as disabled, we look at them more as differently abled, because many of them are able to perform a job. In some cases, it does take some reasonable accommodations, but they are in fact some of the more reliable employees that you're going to find, some of the most capable employees that you're going to find. What they really need is an opportunity. So a big part of it is really helping people to move beyond the stereotypes that we often have about people with disabilities, to understand that if given a chance, they really are very significant untapped resources for employment. We talk about racism, we talk about sexism, we talk about prejudices. I would think that the prejudice against people that have disabilities is a difficult one to get by when it comes to employment. I think you're absolutely right. I think all of those isms are difficult. So let me just say that. But
in terms of individuals with disabilities, because of the kind of stereotypical ideas that we have, which is that, you know, individuals who are physically challenged, who are intellectually challenged, who are emotionally challenged, are individuals who naturally could not perform a job, and they're not equatable.
Well, does a company believe that they have to do more training, that they have to put in more parking lots, they have to bring in more accessibility, or is that all taken care of before they show up?
No, I think in a lot of cases what we're doing is working with companies to help them to understand that, you know, this is a significant population, that it can be a very like I said, a reliable source of employment and employees if given the opportunity. So we work very closely with employers to understand what this might mean in terms of some of the accommodations that they have to make. So it may very well be that we've got to rethink some of the way the job gets done. So it still gets done. It may not be done in the same way that an able-bodied person could get it done. In some cases, it is that. But, you know, we've got to kind of get employers around to recognizing that we've got to make sure that the workplace is accessible for individuals who might be, you know, in wheelchairs and things along those lines. And in a lot of cases, it may mean that you've got to make some structural changes. In a lot of cases, it doesn't mean that it's going to be
No, I understand that. But as part of your initiative, do you, other than what we just talked about, how do you incentivize companies to hire the disabled?
We have been working very diligently in Delaware to help people to understand, and the governor's been very significant in that. Governor Markell has been very significant. You know, like anybody else, the individuals with disabilities, if given a chance, can be, you know, a real asset to organizations and can help an organization become very successful and profitable if given the opportunity.
If there's an employer out there now watching this, if there's a company out there watching this and they want to hear those statistics, they want to hear those stories, that they're interested, how do they get a hold of you? How do they find out?
The biggest thing is to get in contact with us via our website, which is laborde.org.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you
I
very
appreciate,
much.
as always, you coming in. Secretary of Labor Patrice Gilliam-Johnson. When we come back, there is a new organization in Wilmington called the Web Devs. That's web developers. And the hope is that they can create tech jobs in the city. We'll hear how they're making out when the Delaware Way continues.